We want to welcome back those of you who have been away, hopefully in warmer climates. It's nice to have you back. Special welcome back, Jackie, who's been away for some time. It's nice to have you back. What? And Chava, we welcome back last week. Yes, it's good to have Chava back. Also, it's good to have all of you back. We would like to learn this morning, or dedicate our learning for a refuah shlema for Carol's mother, who is recovering from recent surgery, and our wishes are that she should have a complete and speedy refuah. So we will be learning for refuah shlema for Genendel Basdina. Genendel Basdina, and if you could remember her in your davening and in your mishaberach, so I'm sure that would be very appreciated as well. Okay. Today we get into a little bit of a complicated area. Not that other areas that we've been learning are not complicated, but we're actually going to go on a bit of an excursion to talk about kashrus and kashering utensils today. So, you pick. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro.
Amen. How did the men respond to that comment? We're going to do kashering.
Okay, so let's continue. We are on page. Gosh. We haven't changed the page. 840. Thank you. 840. You could go away for like months and come back and we'll still be on 840. It doesn't matter. Maybe we'll be on 842. Look at it. It took us 18 years to do chumash bereshis. 19 years. What do you expect? I mean, okay.
How many years have we been on
Oh, yeah.
10 years.
Yeah, I was going to say, I
Oh,
started
Bamidbar.
at the beginning of Bamidbar. I've been here back 10 years.
10 years.
I can't
Well,
believe
makes
it.
sense,
It
'cause we
seems
go
like it
30
just started.
10
We just started.
Well, it makes sense. This is my
complaining about Shemos.
This is my 30th year. So it took us how many years?
19 years.
19 years to go through chumash bereshis.
It's our 11th year.
So all right. So we're
The
okay.
question is if we remember any bereshit.
It's not quantity, it's quantity.
That you go. Okay. So pasuk tesvav, pasuk 15 on page 840
So right
says,
on schedule.
"V'cho kli fasuach asher ein samid pasil alav tamehu." Now we are talking about what is in the house, because the previous pasuk we learned about tumas ohel. We learned about what happens if someone dies inside of a house, a building, a room, whatever, a car, whatever, and what happens to someone else who comes into that house. Someone else comes into that house, or someone else is in that house, so that person becomes tameh. We call that tumas ohel, and we spent a lot of time on tumas ohel and the difference maybe between Jews and non-Jews, and a lot of the practical ramifications. What the Torah does now, it turns its attention not to people in the house, but rather to objects in the house. In other words, we know that objects can become tameh. That if I'm tameh and I touch an object, or if an object touches something that's tameh, the object itself can become tameh. There is no intrinsic tuma in objects. What's the reason for that?
There's no life.
Correct. There's no intrinsic tuma in objects. In other words, objects can never become a source, a primary source of tuma, because, as Beverly said, they're not alive, right? Remember, tuma is associated with death.
But they can become a conduit.
But they can become a conduit, correct? Right? They can become a conduit, but they can't become a primary source, okay? Because they're not alive. However, what we're talking about now is an object that is in the room in the house, in the whatever of the where a person passed away, where a Jewish person passed away, if we follow that opinion that says there's a difference. Okay, so let's look closely at the verse. It says v'chol kli fasuach, right, which the English translates it as any open vessel, asher ein tzamid pasil alav, that has no seal, right? Seal on it, right? Any open vessel that has no cover fastened to it, like a seal. Tamehu, right? It is tameh. Now, this is the source, interestingly, for a custom that we have when a person passes away in a house. What custom am I referring to? Okay, so there is a custom of putting the person on the floor before taking them out of the house. In other words, when the Chevra Kadisha comes, the Chevra Kadisha will often place a person on the floor, feet towards the door, and then pick up that person and take that person out of the house. Completely separate discussion, and often an unusual discussion in hospitals. You know, hospitals are not too keen about things like that. But okay, that's what a Chevra Kadisha does. That's what, not related, but certainly an important thing. Open a window, Raylene said. That's true. We want to open a window. Why? Because we want not to let anything out. There's like, if you open a window, it doesn't let Tuma out of the room. It's like, whoa, there goes the Tuma. No, right? You open the window. Why do you open a window? No, the neshama doesn't need a window. The neshama doesn't need an open window to get out. Right? You know, it's like people say we open the door, right? We open the door on Pesach for Eliyahu to come in. Eliyahu needs a door to come in.
Yes.
Right?
That's what I learned when I was three. That's it.
Okay, I'm not gonna, I don't want to burst any bubbles, but that's not the reason that we open the door. Eliyahu doesn't need a door to come in, and the neshama doesn't need a window to leave. Right? So why do we open a window? Ventilation. Why do we want ventilation? Because you have a dead body. So number one, if the dead body begins to deteriorate, right? If the dead body begins to deteriorate, which it can if it's in a home for an extended period of time, it produces an odor. There's a smell, and not a pleasant smell, and therefore we want to open a window. Also, certainly certain bodily functions as well cease, and we want to open a window. However, there is a halachic reason for opening a window as well, and that is to preserve the body. Meaning, if it's cold outside and it's not as cold in the house, like let's say today, right? Today it's 40 degrees outside, 35, 40 degrees outside. So in your house, it's 68 degrees. So if you wanted to preserve a body in your house, not that you would be interested in doing that, but if you wanted to preserve a body in your house, you would shut off the heat to that room and you would open the window. And sometimes this becomes an issue. Let's say if a person passes away on Shabbos. A person's at home and passes away on Shabbos, and you wait, which is what you're supposed to do. You wait until Motzei Shabbos before removing that person from your home. A body is muktzah on Shabbos, right? So you wait until Motzei Shabbos before removing that body from the home. It's not an easy thing to do, right? Not at all an easy thing to do, but that's what the halacha says one should do. So under those circumstances, if it's cold outside, you want to open the window in order to keep the room as cold as possible to prevent the body from deteriorating as much as possible. On Shabbos, you don't move the body to the floor. Only Motzei Shabbos before you take it out.
So what happens if you're walking to shul and you come across a dead body? Are you obligated to bury it at that point, or you're just leave it
I would
there?
suggest calling the police.
So then, no, I'm sorry. I mean, what's your obligation then, just to notify the authorities? Even
I mean,
though,
in today's society, if you're walking to shul and there's a dead body or there's a body, right? right? If there's a body on the street, you're walking to shul, I would suggest that you knock on somebody's door and where there's no mezuzah and have them call the police. That would probably, right? In the days, in the olden days, right? If you were walking along and you found a body, right? It was a mitzvah to bury that body, right? And if it was the Kohen Gadol on his way to do the avoda, he would have to stop and bury that body.
Right.
It's called
So-
a mace mitzvah.
So today, if the person dies in your house, you're not obligated to call. So it's, in other words, if it's in your house, you're obligated to do nothing. But
One
if
has
it's not-
nothing. We're talking about two different things.
Okay.
An obligation to bury and this are two different things. You have an obligation to bury if it's one of your 7 relatives. You have an obligation to bury. Now, somebody else might assume that obligation. But until somebody else assumes that obligation, you have an obligation to bury. Okay, so now, what do you do if it's in the summer? In the summer, it's very warm, right? Yeah, but you can't turn the air conditioning on Shabbos. You can't adjust the air conditioning on Shabbos. It's one thing to open the window and let the cold air come in. That I could do on Shabbos. But I can't adjust the air conditioning on Shabbos. So the halacha is you ask someone who's not Jewish to raise, or I always get confused. I don't know, raise or lower, but to make it colder, right? To make it colder in the room. And why can you ask somebody who's not Jewish to do this? Because it is litzorech mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of kavod hames, of properly honoring the dead. And that means doing shmira is kavod hames. Why do we do shmira? Not that we're off topic, right? Why do we do shmira? Right? Shmira is that the body from the time the person dies until burial is watched by someone. That's shmira. Okay? Why do we do shmira? Okay, so out of respect, right? In other words, we want to make sure that this body, well, we want to make sure that you're saying something different, right? We want to make sure that this body is not alone, that it would be considered disrespectful to the body. The neshama's not there, but it would be considered disrespectful to the body to just leave it alone, to just not pay attention to it, so to speak. So we have a shomer who's there to pay attention to it. In the olden days, there was an additional purpose of the shomer. And what was that?
To make sure no one stole the body?
No, not, I mean, yes, that's true. That's true. But in the olden days, right? In the olden days,
Start the
right?
journey?
No, to make sure that animals
Oh.
didn't desecrate the body.
When it's
The
outside.
Gemara says that when a person's alive, right? In other words, if you see a rat, there's like these great videos on YouTube of the New York City subway system, right? And a rat running through the car, right? What happens if you see a rat?
I screamed.
Yeah.
You scream, you jump up on the chair,
Get away.
right? You get away from the rat, right? Now, in reality, that rat is more frightened of you than you should be of him, right? Is a rat male or female? I don't know. I guess they have both, right? Probably from the look of things, they have both. Okay, right? So the idea is that this rat is naturally afraid of a human being. In other words, the basic kinds of animals that desecrate a body are afraid of the body when the person's alive. Right? In other words, that mouse is running out of the room, not because he knows you're going crazy, but because he's scared of you. Right? So when a person dies, when the neshama leaves, that fear departs. The Gemara says that. So in other words, a body, this rat is not afraid of a body. This rat is afraid of a living person, but not afraid of a body. So in the days before we preserved bodies the way that we do today, namely through refrigeration, the body would begin to decompose. It would attract rodents, and the rodents would desecrate the body. So one of the jobs of a shomer in those days was to ensure that the body was safe from desecration by animals. Yes.
That's how Yosef find out about several things about his dream that he's going to die. because the bird came and ate from his basket.
Okay. So Shulamit is corroborating this from the dream of the baker in Parsha 2 weeks ago, right? In 2 weeks ago, the baker dreamt that he was carrying the basket of bread on his head and birds were coming down and eating it, right? Yosef understood from that dream that he was going to die because birds would, birds are afraid of people, right? Birds, despite what Alfred Hitchcock
The
puts
pigeons
together,
don't see.
right? Birds, all right, pigeons are not birds. Pigeons are people, right? They walk like people, I know. I mean, they're just, but birds are generally afraid of people. So birds that were coming down to pick from the basket, that's how Yosef interpreted it, correct. So that shmira used to be. Today, that shmira is not relevant to us. In other words, we don't need to do shmira to make sure that rodents don't desecrate the body because the body is in a place where it's guarded from rodents, which is why me'ikar hadin, in other words, just why according to the strict interpretation, if you hire a shomer, let's say the body goes to a funeral home, you hire a shomer, the shomer gets paid for an 8-hour shift. The shomer does not sit and say Tehillim for 8 hours. It's not, it would be an unusual kind of person who could sit for 8 hours and say Tehillim. What does the shomer do? Every hour for 15 minutes, the shomer sits there and says Tehillim, right? That's why we, in our community, prefer to use our own people for shmira, because I can't say Tehillim for 8 hours, but I can say Tehillim for an hour or for 2 hours. So that's a much more appropriate kavod hames than 45 minutes off and 15 minutes on. Although 45 minutes off and 15 minutes on is the ikar adin acceptable, right? Acceptable. We prefer, if at all possible, to try to make it, an hour on. But this also explains an interesting halacha that if a person passes away in a hospital on Shabbos and the body is taken to the morgue on Shabbos, which often happens in a hospital, it's very rare that a hospital will allow a body to remain in a room, let's say from Friday night until the end of Shabbos, maybe Shabbos afternoon, perhaps, and they take the body down to the morgue. So according to Rabbi Zone, you don't have to sit there, right? You don't have to sit there. You can leave the hospital, right? Because the body's in the morgue, and when the body's in the morgue, it is protected from these, from these kinds of things. And it is under supervision, so to speak, of the hospital. So you don't have to.
Along the same line, if it's in the funeral home, it's also
Correct. It's also protected, right? So we're not doing it for the protection from the protection perspective. We're doing it from the perspective of kavod hames.
okay. But so would you say that to sit in the hospital would be preferred, though? Someone just like it's preferred to sit.
To sit in a hospital would be preferred, but it is not an obligation, says Rabbi Zone. It's not an obligation. We have even there, right? Even there in the funeral home, the way that official shmira is set up is part, 15 minutes out of the hour, right? I'm not sure where the 15 minutes out of that, but okay.
I think it was to protect the body for not being exchanged with another person.
Yeah, that's what.
Right, but that doesn't really, we don't really have to worry about that today. First of all, if you're sitting as a shomer, you don't know where that, there's the refrigerator door, but you don't know which body in there is the body that you're sitting from. There was once a shomer who, in his zeal to fulfill the mitzvah properly, opened the door of the refrigerator, went in, found the body, unzipped the bag because he wanted to see who he was saying Tehillim for, right? Very inappropriate, right? Very inappropriate. He did it l'shem shamayim, but it was a mistake.
I thought it'd be before the actual burial, right, in the cemetery, before they bring the coffin down, the person is identified.
That
by
is
the
correct.
closest member of the
That
family.
is correct. All right. In other words,
In the
um,
cemetery?
Yeah, this is
it,
what.
well, it all depends. Sometimes the idea is done at the cemetery.
Yeah.
In other words, let's say that it is a graveside.
Mhm.
So the idea is done at the cemetery. The casket is pulled a little bit out from the hearse, and the shomer removes the tachrichin that cover the head. It removes the pottery
Right.
because you got to make sure you're burying the right person,
Right.
right? It has happened that funeral homes have taken the wrong person, right? It has happened.
But I've seen that over, several times.
Yeah.
where it's-
So now generally in a funeral where there's a funeral, right? That happened to you? Ah.
Tell your story, Brenda.
It's not such a nice story.
It's an interesting,
I mean, my sister actually is an RN. She's very smart. She's very capable. But she identified the body who she thought was her husband's grandmother, it was not. And you don't know this story.
I don't know this.
Oh,
It's
that
in the
was you?
laurels of.
Yeah.
She thought the body was Buddy, and the body was buried. I mean, it's funny, but so that night.
Was this a block and house?
I think her. How did the story go?
So
Oh, they buried the body, they were sitting
Shiva.
Shiva, and the phone rings, and my
It wasn't
sister's
Bubby, didn't
mother-in-law
phone.
picks up the phone. Oh, she didn't pick up, she's sitting Shiva, whatever.
Right.
Somebody picks up the phone, and it was her mother, who she thought she had just met.
Oh, my God.
So the bottom line to the
Wow.
story
I
is
heard
that the
that
woman was
story.
very, she was sick. I mean, she was floating, she was this, she was that. I mean, I guess
Oh, so
a
she
lot of
hadn't died
very
at all.
old people. But maybe look
Wait, so
sick.
they had a funeral for her and she
But
wasn't
the
there?
bottom line is, they did have a funeral, a proper tahara, the whole thing, and that lady really would never have gotten all of that.
Wow.
But it's a horrible story. I mean, it's a very embarrassing story.
Oh,
My
but
sister,
so she was alive?
my buddy was alive. Buddy
You know what? If
was
somebody would tell me that story, I would say, can't
Was it-
possibly have happened that way.
Except that you know
But
my
if
sister.
Brenda said,
You know my sister.
of course I do. Oh my
older
gosh.
sister.
Where?
So anyway, so,
Oh, my God.
okay, so this is,
That story.
right, so this is a good reason.
So that's
To
the
speak to
reason.
Right.
someone at least
Okay.
once a day.
But the
All right, so this is a good reason to identify the body. It's a good reason to identify the body. You just, because listen, funeral homes are, and people are only people. So, okay, anyway, let's back up. Back up. It's not what we were, what, right? So,
That's an unbelievable
so, all right, we put the body on the floor. I'll take it out. We put the body on the floor. We opened the window, but none of which I was looking for. There's one other thing that I was looking for that's related to this pasuk.
Close them.
Any uncovered liquid in the house is spilled out. Never heard that? Any uncovered liquid in the house is spilled out. If there's a
dead person.
yeah, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about.
Oh, no, because some people, I mean, there are customs that with food, cut food, blah, blah, blah. If it's not covered, you don't need it, blah, blah.
So any
If someone started a can of
Uncovered-
soda.
somebody started a can of soda, somebody has a glass of juice, somebody has a cup of coffee, right? If it is uncovered in the house,
And a liquid.
a liquid, we spill it out. We spill it out. Now, it's not directly related to this because this, as we learn, this pasuk, as we learn, is telling us about a very special kind of object. What? We're going to talk about it. Telling us about a very special kind of object, but there is a practice that is obliquely related to this, which is spilling out any open liquid in the home because it has the ruach ra, right?
At night, only at night.
No, when a person passes away in the house, right? When a person passes away in the house. Okay. Spilling out a liquid that's been left overnight is a whole different concept, right? That's a concept of, in the days, they had days when snakes could come into your house and drink from your coffee cup and inject their poison into your coffee cup and make your caffeine worse for you than it was before. So, that doesn't really happen today, or at least I'm not aware of it happening today. And if it happens today, we might have bigger problems than spilling out but that's liquid which is left uncovered overnight. We're not talking about that. We're talking about liquid which is uncovered in a home at the time that someone dies in the home. So that is,
And the reason?
that is because this idea that when there's a death in the home, there is this tuma, right? This tuma that fills the house, and anything in the house, quote, becomes tameh, unless it's sealed. And we're going to talk about,
So then opening the window would be a natural extension of.
no, because it doesn't leave.
Oh, it doesn't.
Right? Opening the window doesn't leave. I mean, you could turn on the fan and blow it around, but it doesn't leave.
Okay.
Okay. It leaves when the body is taken out of the house. Okay. So there is, none of you ever heard of this custom, right?
No.
Amazing. Okay.
Which custom?
Because I think it's natural for me, if I see a half a cup of water, I spill it out, I put a cup in the dishwasher, I mean, I don't leave things around, so who leaves things around? I don't know.
No, but I'm just,
Do you throw out everything associated with the dish?
no. Listen, let's move. I want to move here. You think we're going to, right. Okay, let's keep going, all right? Well,
We're gonna break our bracelet.
what about Shabbat? You can spill out the water on Shabbat. Okay, that's a whole different topic. We'll talk about that. Not today, though. Okay.
One more away. I have a recommendation for people to see a movie on HBO entitled Taking Chance, which is totally PG. It stars Kevin Bacon, and it's
It's a
about
great movie.
a unit in the Army that's specially, their special task is to take the body of a dead American soldier from wherever that soldier dies to his hometown. It follows them, and the thing that's most impressive to me is that there's a shmira.
That's right.
They actually will never leave, those soldiers will never leave that body. That body, even if they stop over in an airline hangar, they will sit in the hangar and stay with the body.
It's a covered
It's
amaze.
very
It's a
impressive.
beautiful movie.
Yeah, it's very impressed with that, so.
It's a covered amaze. Good. Okay. Anyway, so let's get back more directly to our pasuk. So the pasuk is right. The pasuk is telling us that if there is a kli fasuach, if there is a vessel that is open, patuach from petach, right? It's open. The vessel is open. Asher ein samid pasil alav. It has no seal on it. Obviously, we're going to have to deal with the question of, if the Torah tells us it's open, why does the Torah now have to come along and tell us that it doesn't have anything, doesn't have a seal covering it? In other words, obviously, if it's open, it doesn't have a seal covering it. Okay, we'll talk about that. So it becomes tummy. So the Gemara asks the question, and the Gemara says, when we see the word kli here, does it mean any kind of kli? Kli is a Hebrew word that traditionally refers to an object. Let's say a cooking, pot, a dish, a
Earthenware.
bowl. What?
Earthenware.
No. Kli can be anything. Kli can be a pot. A kli isn't a container. An object is a kli, right? Something
The whole.
manufactured that's useful is called a kli. In our parlance, when we say kli, we're talking about an object primarily used for cooking, serving food, things like that. So, for instance, you're all familiar with the terminology from Shabbos of a kli rishon, or a kli sheni, or a kli shlishi, right? The urn in which your hot water is boiling or is being kept warm on Shabbos is a kli rishon, because that's where the water was cooked. When you pour from that urn into your coffee cup, or you pour from your urn into your teapot, so that teapot is a kli sheni. And when you pour from that teapot into your teacup at the table, that cup is a kli shlishi. So kli here is being used for 3 different kinds of objects. It's a generic, right? It's a generic term. So when the Torah uses the word kli, the Gemara wants to know, all right, why, what are we talking about? There's all different kinds of kelim that are made up of all different kinds of materials, right? So what are we talking about? So in order to understand this Gemara,
I would like to see exactly what you write there. From the urn, you put in a cup, and then in a cup, in a glass, you put in another one.
so we're covering Hilchas Avelos, Hilchos Shabbos today. All right, if you want to make tea, if you want to make coffee, well, coffee is a little bit different because coffee, according to many, is cooked already, right? So people are not as makpid with coffee as they are by tea. But if you want to take a tea bag and put a tea bag into a cup of hot water, you are essentially cooking the tea leaves that are in that tea bag. So what you should do is take water, right, from a kli rishon, put it into a kli sheni. The best thing is to then take the kli sheni, pour the water into a kli shlishi, and put the tea bag into the kli shlishi, which is what we have here. Shabbos, let's say you have an urn, right? You can fill up a cup with hot water, pour that into another cup of hot water, and put your tea bag into that cup.
Instant coffee.
Instant coffee, people put instant coffee into a kli sheni. So in other words, you fill it up from the urn and people put coffee right into it. Not everybody, but people put coffee. Okay, all right. Yes, Brenda.
I know that when you do that, you have to fill up the water and then put the instant coffee into that.
Right.
It's not the usual way you do it.
No, the usual way you do it is you put the coffee in first, and then you pour the hot water in. That's the way most people make coffee.
You can't do that on
You
Shabbos.
can't do that on
I think
Shabbos.
it is a completion. Like what, that wouldn't make any difference.
No, it would make a difference.
Oh, so if you use a completion and you put the coffee in first.
You could use a kli shlishi and put the coffee in first, correct? In other words, remember, okay, I love you all. Remember, okay? Remember, yes, kli rishon, kli sheni, kli shlishi. However, there are intermediate steps here, right? When we talk about kli sheni, we're talking about when the water is already in the cup. The water, when it's being poured from kli rishon into the cup, is called irui kli rishon. It's being poured from the kli rishon, and it's not as high a standard as the kli rishon, but it's not as low as the kli sheni. That's why we don't put the instant coffee in the cup first and then pour the water into it, right? Because that's irui, that we shouldn't do. First, you pour the water in. Oh, now I have a kli sheni, and I put the coffee in. Okay? Okay, good. So, all right, these are important things to learn. But so we want to know, when we talk about kelim, what kind of kelim existed in the days of the Chumash?
Earthenware, clay.
Pottery,
Okay, so the kinds of
wood.
kelim that existed are metal, stone, which we'll talk more about, and wood. Those are the kinds of kelim that existed.
What about leather?
You don't eat from them.
People didn't use leather for,
Carrying water or
oh, they might have used it for carrying, yeah, but they didn't use it for cooking. Leather wasn't used in cooking in any way. Right? I mean, obviously they had leather, but usually they wore the leather.
But they didn't have pottery?
No, they had pottery. That's earthen, right? Stone, right? Pottery is essentially stone. We'll talk about it, but it's essentially stone. How do we know about these kinds of kelim? No. I mean, obviously we find them, you know. The Torah tells us that when the Jewish people went out to battle against Midian, the Midianites, and they captured the spoils, right, of the battle, Included among those spoils were kalim, were the cooking objects of the Midianites that they used to cook things which weren't kosher. So when the Bnei Yisrael brought those objects back, they needed to be told how to kosher those items. That's our source. That's one source for the kinds of kalim that existed, right? That's one source. And that source is talking primarily about metal kalim, right? Metal kalim. I'm just going to say kalim, metal kalim. There's another source in the Torah, not in the Parsha of Midjan, but in the Parsha of Karbanos, where we talk about a dish that has absorbed flavor from the meat of the carbon. In other words, a dish which has absorbed flavor from the meat of the carbon. That when the carbon can no longer be eaten, so that kli can no longer be used. Why? Because the flavor of the forbidden carbon is in that meat, is in that kli,
After a certain time.
Yes, we know that a carbon could only be eaten for a certain period of time, right? Depending upon the kind of carbon it was, it might only be able to be eaten that day, or it might be able to be eaten the day, the night, and the following day. Depending upon the type of carbon, the day and the night, or the day, the night, and the day. Okay, depending upon the kind of carbon. But when it reached the end of the prescribed time, that carbon became forbidden. It's called notar, left over. You're not allowed to use it, right? Which is a good thing for husbands to say when they're told that there's leftovers for dinner, right? Right? You're not allowed to use it. So, right? So you had to burn it, and if it was absorbed into a dish, right? If it was absorbed into a dish, so that flavor that was absorbed into the dish, becomes not usable as well. Okay. Now that dish which the Chumash is telling us about was a kli cheres. It was a kli cheres. A kli cheres. The word cheres means pottery. Now, what is pottery? Right? What is pottery? And what we're going to get involved with now, is this concept of, if I take a kli, a utensil, how does that utensil absorb, or does it absorb what I cook in the utensil? So for instance, if I take a utensil and I cook cholent in that utensil, does the essence of the cholent get absorbed into the walls of that utensil? So we know intuitively that it does. Now, we don't know, we don't know what this essence is. In Hebrew, the essence is called ta'am. Ta'am means taste, right? But it's a word, right? It's called ta'am, but there's no way to determine whether or not that essence, which is absorbed into the walls of the pot, which is on a molecular level, does that taste like cholent? It doesn't mean it tastes like cholent. It means that on a molecular level, it is considered cholent, right? It's considered cholent. So if I took this pot of cholent, right, I cooked the cholent, and now I serve the cholent, and the pot's empty, right? The pot is empty, and I washed the pot out. And now I cooked accidentally my cream of my macaroni and cheese in the pot, right? So what happens?
You throw it
Oh, you
away.
look around.
So first of all, my wife kicks me out of the kitchen, right? Right? What happens? So we say that the essence, the molecular essence, the ta'am, which is the molecular essence of the cholent, which is absorbed in the walls of the pot, come out and are now absorbed into the macaroni and cheese. Okay? Right? And now what happens? So now the non-kosher macaroni and cheese is being absorbed. The molecular essence of this non-kosher macaroni and cheese is now being absorbed back into the walls of the pot. Okay? So it gets, now, what causes that absorption?
But it depends on the.
Wait,
flavors
let's
that
not say it
are
depends
in
yet. What causes the absorbing of a substance of this molecular essence into the walls of the kli? Heat. Heat causes this transfer, okay? And as a result of that, if heat caused the transfer in, so heat can also cause the transfer out, which is why when you cook your macaroni and cheese in your cholent pot, you have a problem with the macaroni and cheese. Why? Because it has the molecular essence of the cholent, which was in the walls of the pot, is now in the macaroni and cheese. So your macaroni and cheese is no good, but your pot also has to be koshered. Why? Because the pot has now absorbed
Because it's mixed up.
the pot has now absorbed the molecular essence of this basar v'chalav, of this milk and meat mixture. Okay? Now, so that's heat. By the way, is there another way in which something can be absorbed?
If it's porous, if the glaze is not.
You know what? Let's just stay. Let's stay for the meantime with a metal pot.
Oh,
Let's stay. We're going to make it simple, so we'll get out of here before 20 years. All right? Right? We're gonna talk about a metal pot. Is there any other way that Tom can be absorbed in a metal pot?
I think the sharpness of the line.
Yes, there is a way in which Tom can be absorbed in a metal pot, even if there is no heat. And that is through a principle called kavush. Kavush, meaning that you have something that sits in the pot for more than 24 hours, right? So if I take my cholent and I cook my cholent in a pot, all right, and now I let my cholent cool off, and I take my cold cholent and I put my cold cholent in another pot, a parv pot, and I put it in a parv pot, and I let it sit and then I put it in the refrigerator, and it sits in my parv pot from Shabbos until Wednesday when I realized the mistake, right? What's happened to my parv pot?
It's not porous.
It's no longer parv. It has to be
Those
kosher.
parv pots have no future.
Right?
Then it becomes flaky.
Oh, correct. It doesn't have to be. It only has to be koshered if you want to use it for parv again. Otherwise, it is now flashing. Otherwise, it's now flashing. So that's a second way in which Tom can be absorbed, which is if it is allowed to sit for more than 24 hours, which has interesting ramifications for people who want to use milk bottles as containers for serving water or seltzer or things like that. You have to just think about, these kinds of things, right? Because if you have a milk bottle that was used for milk, right? I mean, I don't know how many of us
I was
use it.
just gonna say.
All right. Okay.
Different lifestyle.
Okay, good. I'm dating myself. All right.
Well, we're
Sorry,
really
Rabbi. What about Benyomo?
Okay. So
it's different.
I don't want to get there yet. I don't want to get. It's going to take us even further afield.
When
All
did we extend the
We
class?
have.
I haven't done it.
Okay. So let's keep going here. Okay. Now, in order for this Tom, this molecular essence, to enter into the kli, there needs to be heat present, or a time of 24 hours has elapsed. And the kli needs to be a porous kli.
That's what I said.
And the kli needs to be a porous kli. Okay? Metal, by definition, is porous. Yes,
If
metal.
Aluminum gets pitted, an aluminum pot, if you cook certain things in it.
You should not be using aluminum to cook anyway,
But
right?
you're
Aluminum is not a good idea to cook with anyway because it,
selling
right. Yeah, they still do, right? Right.
We don't know what's going on in the back, but they use.
Okay, anyway, so, all right, so it has to be porous, right? It has to be porous. A metal kli is porous. A wooden kli is porous. So if I took a wooden spoon and stirred my cholent, that wooden spoon is flakes, okay? Because it absorbed, it's porous, it absorbed the molecular essence, the tom of the cholent. But what about if I took my cholent and poured it into a glass bowl? I took my cholent and poured it into a glass bowl. Scenario number one. I took my
Hot or
cholent.
cold, or does that matter?
I took my hot cholent and poured it into a
Cold glass bowl.
room temperature glass bowl. Scenario number one. I took my hot cholent and poured it into a room temperature Pyrex bowl. I took my hot cholent and poured it into a room temperature Corel bowl. Right? I took my cholent and poured it into a room temperature plastic bowl.
Plastic is absorbed.
All right? I put it into a plastic bowl. So what are we grappling with here? Right? What are we?
Whether it's absorbent.
In all cases, my cholent was hot. In all cases, my cholent was hot. So we know that metal is porous and that metal accepts this molecular essence, this tom, and expels it, which explains why when you kosher a pot, you fill the pot with water, you boil the water in the pot, and the heat of the boiling water extracts the molecular essence which is in the pot. Now,
All right.
remember when I told you about the cholent? And after the cholent, you put in your mac and cheese, and the heating of the mac and cheese extracted the molecular essence, the tom of the cholent, into your mac and cheese and made your mac and cheese fleshik and milchik. So basically treif. So why doesn't the water, when I kosher a pot, why doesn't the water become fleshik and then it just gets absorbed back into the walls of the pot? You ever think about that?
There's something special about water.
Because the water is not meat and not.
Good. So what?
It's
So
now
what?
fleshik.
If I took my cholent pot and I cooked
Power vegetables.
I cooked par vegetable soup in my pot, it would also become fleshik.
Water has special qualities. And it-
No, water doesn't have special. Water does have special qualities, but this is not a spiritual matter. We're not spiritual here. This is right. This is halacha. Now, obviously, halacha and spirituality go hand in hand. What happened? Say it. Okay, batul b'shishim. In other words, there are two things to think about here. Okay, we have a principle. We have a principle that this is all background. We have a principle that says that certain substances can become nullified in a mixture which is 60 times the value of the 60 times the volume of the
The
substance.
ratio.
Okay, right. So for instance, if I had a cholent pot, big cholent pot, and I was making my coffee and I poured milk into my coffee, and a drop of milk splashed from my coffee into my cholent pot.
Next time she get covered.
What do we say? We say you don't have to worry about it because the amount of milk that's spilled accidentally into the cholent pot has been nullified because there's clearly 60 times the volume of that milk in that cholent, right? Now, if you take a gallon of milk and pour it in, that's a whole different question, all right? But here, under certain, that's the principle of batel b'shishin.
So.
Yeah.
On Pesach, there's no issue about Tobashishim. That way you must kasher before Pesach.
Correct.
If you were to kasher a pot on Pesach.
You cannot kasher a pot on Pesach.
Okay. So it has
Because
to be-
chametz is not subject to the laws of batel b'shishin.
Question, so if you make a para vegetable soup in the cholent pot, which people might do
Go ahead,
practically today.
right,
So is that, and it's not there 24 hours?
right. Is that soup fleshik?
Yes.
So if it was,
Or is it karev
if
that
this-
you wouldn't put on? a
okay,
milk
if it's,
dish?
if the object is parav and you've cooked it in a fleshik kli
Right,
within 24 hours,
right.
so the object becomes whatever that will become fleshik in this case. So if I cooked my parav soup in a fleshik pot within 24 hours of that pot being used for fleshiks,
Right.
my
Oh, not
soup,
with, oh. that
my
isn't
soup
what I
is
meant.
parav.
That
But if
isn't
I
what
cook-
meant.
But if I cook my parav soup in a fleshik pot, once 24 hours has passed from the last fleshik
Okay.
use of that pot,
Right,
my soup is not fleshik.
right.
But
Cannot be
Can
put
eat
on
milk.
milk
I
dishes.
do not eat it at the same time that I eat milk. So for instance, I cannot sprinkle cheese into that vegetable soup.
But can you put that vegetable soup on a milk plate?
I could put that vegetable soup in a milk plate.
And it
yes.
wouldn't break
Correct.
the plate.
Now, why is that? Because I didn't want to get here, but why is that? As Shulamit mentioned earlier, we have a concept of ben yomo. Ben yomo means within 24 hours. So just as we said, if something sits in a pot for more than 24 hours, the pot absorbs what was sitting in it. So too, whatever molecular essence is absorbed in the pot after 24 hours weakens, right? It weakens and it's not strong enough to infuse what you cook with that molecular essence, which is why we tell someone when you're koshering a pot, wait 24 hours before koshering. This way, in case there's not shishin, in case there's not 60 times the volume in the pot, because remember, what the pot contains has to be 60 times the volume of the walls and bottom of the pot, right? Because we don't know what's ever been absorbed has been absorbed into the walls and the bottom of the pot. So we say wait 24 hours because then any molecular essence, any tom that comes out is going to be not strong enough to be infused into the water. So it'll dissipate, it'll disappear in the water. Then there'll be nothing reabsorbed into the pot. The same thing if it's shishim, it gets nullified in the water, and there's nothing that gets absorbed into the pot.
But this Gemara, what this Gemara is that if the molecular, they knew about molecules in the time of the Gemara?
They knew about tom, they knew about taste, right? They knew about taste. When we talk about taste, right? In other words, what would you have to do? So now you have to taste your mac and cheese. If we're gonna go strictly by taste, I'm gonna have to taste my mac and cheese and find out whether there's any cholent flavor in my mac and cheese, right? So that, first of all, I can't do that, right? I can't taste it. I can't taste it to find that out. And secondly, even if I could taste it, who's to say that I could discern whether or not there is actual cholent taste in my mac and cheese. So because of that, I'm referring to it as a molecular essence. It's called Tom because
Right.
the essence is taste. But
Right, the same thing is for kosher the oven for Pesach.
all the same thing applies whenever you kosher something. Whenever you kosher something, these same rules apply across the board. Now, let's get back to my three scenarios. Let's get back to my 3 scenarios. Okay? 4 scenarios. Okay. Now, first of all, did they have plastic in those days?
No.
They didn't have plastic in those days. So since they didn't have plastic, right? Plastic is a synthetic material. So since they didn't have plastic in those days, the halachic deciders of, I don't know how old plastic is, but however old plastic is, right? Halachic deciders needed to determine what's the nature of plastic. Is it comparable to X, Y, or Z? Is it porous? Is it not porous? Okay. We know plastic is porous and we know that plastic does absorb. The question is whether or not plastic can be koshered. Whether or not plastic can be koshered. So the general Ashkenazic approach is that we kosher plastic during the year, but we don't kosher plastic on Pesach. However, recently things have begun to shift, and Rav Gedalia Dov Schwartz of the CRC, right, the Chicago Rabbinical Council, has allowed the koshering of plastic on Pesach. And in Eretz Yisrael, they allow the koshering of plastic on Pesach, which is how one can kosher certain countertops, where the countertops are made of a plastic material, right? A plastic material. So there are people who say you cannot kosher your laminate countertops because we don't kosher plastic for Pesach. And there are other people who say you can kosher your laminate countertops because we do kosher plastic for Pesach. What you have to be careful for is the seams, in the laminate. You have to, it becomes very complicated. All right. But okay, plastic. So plastic they didn't have. Plastic, our poskim have decided, does absorb, and also depending upon which posik you ask, can be kosher, right? If it absorbs, can it expel as well? So that's the debate here. Also, of course, the plastic needs to be able to withstand the heat to kosher it. Whereas if I take a plastic cup and I put it in the boiling water, it's going to destroy the cup, right? So it needs to be a kind of plastic. If I'm koshering the plastic for during the year or for Pesach, according to those who say you can kosher plastic for Pesach, so it needs to be the kind of plastic that can withstand the heat of koshering. Okay, that's plastic.
How does this
Corral,
come from the
you
dead
said
body,
Pirates
Bill?
and
I'm not.
We haven't come back to the dead body. Our dead body is still lying in the house.
Clearly, she has the best powers of concentration.
Right? Our dead body is lying in the house. We haven't gotten back to our dead body. It's not going anywhere. Don't worry. Even though you open the window, it's not going anywhere. Okay. All right. So now. Okay. So here we go. Okay. Now, I brought it up because it's relevant and germane to what we're talking about. And it's also, I think, important for people to understand these things, okay? Now, so the question is, what about glass? What about glass? All right, what is glass? Glass is sand, and the sand is melted, right? It's made into a molten material, and then it is either blown into a shape or put into a mold, right? Poured into a mold to create a shape, right? That's what glass is. Does glass absorb?
No, I don't know. Depends on the glass, because I know Pyrex dishes are white Pyrex dishes.
Okay, so very interesting. Here we have a fundamental disagreement between Sfardim and Ashkenazim. Right? We have a fundamental disagreement between Sfardim and Ashkenazim. And if you wanted to be a Sfardi, this would be a reason to become a Sfardi. The Mechaber writes in the Shulchan Aruch that glass does not absorb. And that is the position of Sfardim. They follow the Mechaber, they follow the Rabbi Yosef Karo, that glass does not absorb. So what does that mean? So if I'm a Sfardi and I have a glass plate and I put hot cholent on that glass plate, as soon as I'm done my cholent, I can wash the plate so that there's no schmutz. I don't know how to translate that word. There's no residue. Thank you. There's no residue on the plate. And I can take my mac and cheese, put it in the plate, and eat my mac and cheese. Right, of course, you know what? Maybe let me do it the other way. I first had my mac and cheese, and then I had my cholent afterwards. All right, okay, because according to the Mechaber, glass does not absorb. So I can use glass plates for both milchiks and fleishiks.
I thought it's only for cold.
I'm talking Sfardim. I'm talking Mechaber. I can use glass plates for hot milchiks and fleishiks. Right? As long, what? As I'm not talking about, okay.
Old style.
Okay, let's not talk about, I'm not talking about Pyrex. I'm talking about glass plates, let's say, or drinking glasses.
Right.
Okay, drinking glasses. So for instance, all right, I don't know, I don't want to ask the question, but many Sephardic households have one set of drinking glasses that they use for milchiks, for fleishiks. They wash it in the dishwasher, in the milchik dishwasher, in the fleishik dishwasher, and that's it. All right? And that's it. Right? Is that accurate? I don't know. I'm not saying, right? That's
You might come
right.
over.
That is the
That must have come over to some Ashkenazim. That's the way it made it.
Right.
Oh,
That's
okay.
right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Whoa.
You drank, was that your?
Right? This is. Listen, that's what I mean. I use sour cream glasses for Pesach growing up. That's what I use. I don't know about you guys.
Oh, with the little flowers.
Yes, sour cream glasses with the little flower.
This is sour cream
Oh my
cake.
gosh. Sour cream used to come in glass containers, right? They had decorations on them, and that's what we use for drinking glasses on Pesach, right? Okay. Never. Okay. Never.
They don't
Okay. Look how far we've come. All right. Now we just go away for Pesach. So what do we have? So we have, that's the Sephardic opinion when it comes to using glass. That from a purely Mechaber position, Mechaber means the author. The author, that's what it means. Mechaber is the author. It refers to Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was the author of the Shulchan Aruch, who is the posek for Sfardim. Sfardim follow the Shulchan Aruch. Ashkenazim also follow the Shulchan Aruch, but we have an additional component, and that's the Ramah of Moshe Isserlis, who wrote the gloss on the Shulchan Aruch that reflects Ashkenazic practice. The Shulchan Aruch reflects Sephardic practice. This has the Ramah adds the Ashkenazic practice onto it. The Ramah disagrees with the Mechaber here when it comes to glass. And the Ramah says that Ashkenazic Jews should not use glass for both milchiks and fleishiks. Should not use glass for hot for both milchiks and fleishiks. Okay. No, what happens if you grow up in a house, as I think many people did, where I only had one set of drinking glasses. I will tell you, my kids have two sets of drinking glasses.
Paper
Right?
for this.
My kids have two sets of drinking glasses. I don't have 2 sets of drinking glasses. I have 1 set of drinking glasses. Okay, I have 1 set of drinking glasses. Ich bin a sheikh. It's what am I relying on?
It's what?
Carol, can you?
I told you when we do the
All right.
sitcom in this class, I want
Okay.
to
All right. So, in other words, 1 set of drinking glasses. What do we rely on? What did we rely on for 1 set of drinking glasses?
Cold.
Namely, that the drinking glasses were generally not used for hot. Drinking glasses were used for cold. And if we were drinking something hot, like hot tea, we had separate tea glasses, right? Separate teacups, separate tea glasses, separate glasses that we actually drank. A glazel tea, we actually drank,
In a
right?
holding cup.
Whatever. Okay. All right.
Such a
So,
coffee failure.
so says that's what we relied on, right? That we didn't use them for hot. But now the question becomes, what about washing them?
That's the dishwasher.
Which
Right? What about washing them? So according to Ashkenazic poskim, you should not be washing your drinking glasses in your fleshik dishwasher. You should not be washing your drinking glasses in your fleshik dishwasher. If you're Sephardi, no problem. But if you're Ashkenazi, you should not be washing your drinking glasses in your fleshik dishwasher. You should be washing your drinking glasses by hand.
What if your milk? Or whatever.
You
No,
you should not wash your
In a dishwasher.
you should not wash your drinking glasses in your milchik dishwasher either. All right? You should ideally wash your drinking glasses by hand. No, you don't have to use cold water. You can use hot water, but just not, it's not in the dishwasher. The dishwasher is like a big kli, right? And using very hot water. So if you're washing your fleshik dishes in that dishwasher, it's like taking your glasses and putting them in your cholent pot. Right? Putting them in your cholent. Now, there are people who are lenient. There are people who say that the dishwasher has 60 times the amount of whatever fleshik substance there is, right? And the water and the soap nullifies it also. So there are people who will rely on these leniencies and wash their glasses in a dishwasher, all right? And, there are husbands who will rely on these leniencies because of pikuach nefesh.
Because they don't want
Right.
to do this, they don't want to wash the glasses.
Or their wives will kill them if they say you have to wash the dishes by hand. So there are leniencies upon which to rely. And many people do rely on those leniencies, whether it's the soap leniency, whether it was the Eino Ben Yomo leniency, whether
What does
it's
that mean?
that it's not within 24 hours, that you're using
okay,
the glass
yeah,
not within 24 hours, whether they rely on the batul b'shishim leniency. There are leniencies on which to rely. I don't want you to think you have to go home and kasher your glasses, because that's a problem in and of itself. All right. But what Ashkenazim say, what they say, Ashkenazic poskim seem to say that you should not be washing those dishes with hot fleshiks.
Makes sense.
With hot
It makes
fleshiks.
sense.
Okay. In distinction to the Ramah. Okay, the dead body will have to wait a week. Oh, next week. Wait, next week, do we have, how many of you are around next week for a class? Okay, it's a fast day next week, so,
Oh.
no, but we could still have a class.
It's early in the morning.
What?
Even better, Danny before.
There you go, okay. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
So.
Thelma, there are